The coffee in Marcus Webb's hand was cold. He'd made it 90 minutes ago at the pre-flight briefing, and it still sat in the thermal mug, untouched, growing increasingly unappetizing. Outside the Boeing 737 small galley window, the Nevada desert stretched into absolute blackness. No moon yet, just stars so bright they hurt to look at directly, scattered across the sky like someone had flung diamonds across black velvet. Marcus had seen this view thousands of times, and it never stopped feeling like a privilege, even if no one else in the world would understand why. He was invisible. That's what he'd become over 16 years of flying cargo routes across America's emptiest landscapes. The kind of pilot other pilots didn't notice. The kind of name that never appeared in aviation magazines or industry newsletters. Just Marcus Webb, 49 years old. He'd be 50 in 6 weeks, flying a 737 freighter for Stratosphere Logistics, a company so aggressively corporate and deliberately anonymous that its name appeared on aircraft like a whisper. His hands, as he checked the altitude trim settings one more time, showed his age. Veins mapped across the backs of them like rivers on a terrain chart. His knuckles had begun to develop the arthritis that his father had complained about during his own flying years. Marcus wondered sometimes if his father felt proud or disappointed that his son had chosen cargo over commercial passenger routes. They'd never discussed it directly. Their conversations, limited to obligatory phone calls on holidays and birthdays, had a quality of awkward formality that suggested both men regretted whatever distance had grown between them. But tonight, Marcus wasn't thinking about his father or the slow deterioration of his hands, or even the fact that his ex-wife Julie had married someone named Robert 3 years ago. Tonight, he was thinking about the cargo manifest, which sat in a folder strapped to the yoke of his aircraft. Medical equipment, routine supplies, replacement components for an air base's infrastructure. Nothing classified. Nothing important enough to warrant a second glance. He'd filed his flight plan at 2:31 a.m. The Nelly's Tower had cleared him with the kind of efficiency that came from midnight shifts and too many repetitions of the same procedures. Stratosphere 447, cleared for takeoff, runway 3 left, climbed to flight level 250, maintained squawk 2146. Marcus had read back the clearance perfectly, word for word, the kind of disciplined repetition that kept pilots alive in the dark. Then he'd released the parking brakes, felt the massive aircraft, empty except for cargo, so light it practically wanted to fly, begin rolling down the tarmac. The runway lights had streaked beneath his wings, brilliant and precise, and then the landing gear had left asphalt and he was airborne. That was 19 minutes ago. Now, climbing through 18,000 feet and preparing to level off at 24,000, Marcus found himself thinking about something his flight instructor had mentioned during his commercial rating training 23 years ago. "The night," Captain Harrison had said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 3 decades flying through darkness, "is where flying becomes honest. The daylight hides mistakes. Sloppy procedures, lazy navigation, cutting corners. You can get away with it in daylight because there's always another reference point. But at night, the night reveals everything about a pilot. It shows you who you really are." Marcus had never forgotten that. He'd built his entire career on the principle that the night demanded absolute precision. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Every instrument cross-checked, every heading verified, every radio call crisp and professional. The invisibility he'd cultivated, the fact that his name appeared nowhere in any aviation log that mattered, that his achievements went unrecorded, that he'd never been interviewed or celebrated, was a direct result of that philosophy. Precision without recognition, it suited him fine. But as he leveled off at 24,000 feet and trimmed the aircraft for cruise, something began to feel different. It was subtle enough that Marcus almost missed it, almost dismissed it as fatigue or the natural hypersensitivity of a pilot alone in the darkness. But his body knew. His years of accumulated flying hours, The muscle memory that had been built through repetition and survival suddenly registered a discrepancy. The air pressure felt wrong. Marcus checked his instruments immediately, a practice scan that took less than 3 seconds. Altimeter, 24,010 feet, exactly where it should be. Vertical speed indicator, 0 feet per minute, leveling off perfectly. Airspeed, 420 knots, exactly the cruise speed for a 737 at this altitude. Navigation display, showing his position exactly where it should be, following the airways laid out across the digital map like a highway system through space. Everything was perfect. But his gut said something was wrong. 30 years of flying instinct didn't lie. Marcus had learned that long ago. The human body, after sufficient repetition in an environment, develops sensors that conscious thought can't access. Pilots called it instinct. Aeronautical engineers called it subconscious pattern recognition. Whatever the terminology, it was real, and it was screaming at him now. He reduced the cabin lights further, letting his eyes adjust completely to darkness. The instrument panel glowed softly in his vision. Outside, the stars were so bright he could see the horizon line between the desert below and the sky above, a faint demarcation of darkness against slightly less darkness. His cargo plane, so ordinary, so unremarkable, hummed through the atmosphere on its routine course. Then he heard it, not on his radio, not through any external speaker system. It was more fundamental than that. A change in the pressure waves reaching his ears, a subtle shift in the ambient sound of the aircraft. Something was there. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his heading select, making sure his course was exactly as filed. It was. He double-checked his radio frequency. Nellie's departure was still there in his headset, silent but active. Other aircraft would be on this frequency, but no one was transmitting. The airwaves were so quiet they felt actively suppressed. His eyes scanned outward into the darkness. The moon hadn't risen yet, just stars and the glow of the aircraft's navigation lights, small red and white beacons that marked his position against infinite blackness. Nothing else, nothing visible. But he could feel them, the way a gazelle feels the lion's attention before it sees the predator. Something had changed in the envelope of his personal airspace. Something that shouldn't be there was now present, approaching with deliberate purpose. Marcus's breathing slowed. His hands remained steady on the yoke. This was the moment that separated good pilots from legends, though he didn't know it yet. This was the moment when the night was about to reveal who he truly was. The radar warning receiver chimed 3 times in rapid succession. Marcus's entire body went rigid. Not an alert, a warning. Something was painting his aircraft with active radar. Not Nellie's ground control radar. That was always there, benign, providing separation and guidance. This was different. This was targeting acquisition radar, the kind used by military aircraft. Nellie's departure, stratosphere 447, Marcus transmitted immediately, his voice controlled despite the adrenaline now flooding his system. I'm showing radar contact, multiple targets, vector unknown. Can you advise my traffic? The response came back quickly, almost too quickly, as if the controller had been waiting for his call. Stratosphere 447, Roger. We show targets at your 7 o'clock, descending through your altitude. Stand by. Stand by, 2 words that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Marcus's hands gripped the yoke tighter and he forced himself to relax them deliberately. Tension was the enemy in the cockpit. It led to stupid mistakes. It led to over-controlling. It led to pilots dying in ways that didn't have to happen. He scanned the darkness outside the windscreen methodically. 7 o'clock position meant slightly behind him and to his left. He adjusted his head position, searching for running lights, for any visual reference to match the radar contact. Nothing yet. Just the endless black, pierced only by stars that seemed impossibly bright and impossibly distant at the same time. Then he saw it. A single point of light, red and steady, moving through the darkness with purposeful precision. A navigation light, an aircraft. But the speed and angle of approach were wrong. No commercial aircraft moved like that. No military transport either. This was fighter-class maneuverability, and it was closing on his position fast. Marcus's mouth went dry. He keyed his radio again. Nellie's departure, I have visual on one target, climbing to my position. Request vectors away from traffic. Before the controller could respond, two things happened simultaneously. First, a second aircraft emerged from the darkness below him, moving with the same aggressive precision as the first. Second, Marcus's awareness shifted into a different state, what pilots called combat mode. His breathing slowed, his vision sharpened. Every instrument and every visual reference became crystal clear. Fear was still there, humming beneath the surface like an idling engine, but it was controlled, channeled, usable. The first aircraft pulled alongside his right wing. The second positioned itself on the left. They moved in perfect formation with his cargo plane, a Boeing 737 freighter, a lumbering, slow aircraft designed to haul cargo across the country, not to engage in aerial ballet with military fighters. But somehow, they were matching his exact speed, his exact altitude, his exact heading. The precision of it was almost supernatural. Then Marcus could see them clearly, silhouetted against the lesser darkness of the sky. F-22 Raptors, fifth-generation fighter jets, some of the most advanced aircraft in human history, and they were flying formation with a retired military cargo pilot in a commercial freighter, locked in perfect alignment, so close he could see the canopy glints and the edge of their fuselages. Nellie's departure, I now have visual identification. Two F-22 fighters, one on each wing, forming up in close formation. No radio contact established. This is highly unusual. Request immediate clarification. The response, when it came, was oddly calm. Stratosphere 447, we show your position. Those fighters are authorized. Maintain your current heading and altitude. Do not deviate. Do not deviate. The most ominous command a pilot could receive. It meant whatever was happening was known, was being monitored, and was deliberate. It meant Marcus wasn't in an emergency situation. He was in something far stranger, something orchestrated. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Military interception. No, that required a reason. False transponder code. His were correct. Navigational deviation. He was exactly on course. Threat to military airspace. He was in approved corridors. Nothing made sense, and yet here it was. Two fighter jets locked in formation with his aircraft, their pilots maintaining perfect positioning that would require absolute focus and precision. The lead fighter, positioned on his right wing, banked almost imperceptibly. Marcus saw the movement through his peripheral vision. The pilot was shifting weight, testing the formation, communicating. Then slowly, deliberately, the F-22's wing dipped toward him. Once. Twice, 3 times, an unmistakable gesture in the language of aviation. Follow me. Marcus's hands trembled slightly on the yoke. This was impossible. Whatever was happening transcended normal procedure, normal protocol, normal military operations. He was being signaled to deviate from his flight plan by fighter jets that had no legitimate reason to intercept him. Nellie's departure. The lead fighter is signaling me to follow. I'm requesting explicit authorization before deviating from my filed flight plan. The pause that followed was longer than any previous pause. Marcus counted the seconds. 5, 10, 15. The silence stretched like taffy, elastic and uncomfortable. When the controller's voice finally came back, it carried a different tone. Not uncertainty exactly, but something close to it. Like someone making a decision they weren't entirely confident in. Stratosphere 447, you are authorized to follow fighter guidance. I repeat, you are authorized to follow F-22 direction. Maintain radio contact with this frequency. Marcus's heart was hammering now. This wasn't a normal authorization. No standard aviation authority granted this kind of open-ended clearance. No commercial pilot received instructions to deviate from filed flight plans based on hand signals from military aircraft. This was something entirely different. He took a breath, let it out slowly, checked his fuel status, 84% remaining, more than enough for whatever was about to happen, checked his systems, all green, engine temperatures nominal, hydraulics perfect, navigation systems locked in. His cargo was secure, everything was as ready as it could be. The lead F-22's wing dipped again, more urgently this time. The second fighter tightened its formation position on the left. The message was clear. Now, whatever they wanted him to do, they wanted him to do it now. Marcus adjusted his heading to follow the lead fighter's vector. As he did, he noticed something in the distance ahead, a glow on the horizon that shouldn't be there. Not a city. Cities had a scattered, diffuse light signature. This was different. This was concentrated, unusual, and it pulsed with a rhythm that seemed somehow wrong. Nellie's departure. I'm following fighter guidance as authorized, deviating from flight plan heading. Can you advise what I'm being vectored toward? The response came quickly. 447, stand by. We're tracking your deviation. But Marcus's attention was locked ahead now, on that strange glow growing larger as the three aircraft descended slightly and increased speed. The lead F-22 banked harder. The formation tightened, and the strange luminescence ahead grew brighter, more defined, more real. Whatever was happening, Marcus Webb, invisible cargo pilot, 16-year veteran of routine routes and anonymous flights, was about to discover exactly what the night sky was capable of hiding. Nellie's departure, stratosphere 447, Marcus transmitted, trying to keep his voice level despite the cascade of adrenaline coursing through his veins. I'm following fighter formation as authorized. Can you provide any additional information regarding my current heading or destination? Static answered. Not the usual static of an open frequency, but something deeper, more intentional. Marcus waited. The F-22 on his right wing seemed to tighten its formation position, the pilot making micro-adjustments to maintain perfect alignment with the lumbering cargo plane. Below them, the desert floor rushed past in shades of gray and black, illuminated by starlight and the slight luminescence that persists even in the deepest night. Stratosphere 447, Nellie's departure, the controller's voice came back, and Marcus could hear something in it now, a careful neutrality that suggested this conversation was being monitored at levels far above a routine air traffic controller. We're still tracking your position. Maintain current heading and altitude. No further guidance available at this time. No further guidance. Translation. We don't know what you're being vectored toward, and we're not authorized to tell you even if we did. Marcus's hands flexed on the yoke. The strange glow ahead was becoming more defined now. Not a city, definitely not a city. Cities had edges, boundaries. This was something that seemed to exist in layers, with depth that light shouldn't possess. It pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't quite regular but wasn't random either, almost like breathing, like something alive was creating it. The lead F-22's wing dipped again, more forcefully this time. But it wasn't a follow-me gesture anymore. It was something different, something urgent. The pilot was leaning forward slightly. Marcus could see through the cockpit canopy, his head bent in concentration. Then the second F-22, the one locked on his left wing, did something that made Marcus's entire nervous system scream warning. Its afterburners ignited. The sudden bloom of orange flame, brilliant and hot and absolutely impossible to miss, lit up the darkness like a flare. The fighter's acceleration was instantaneous, violent, the kind of energy-to-weight ratio that a freighter could never hope to match. But the pilot didn't pull away completely. Instead, the maneuver seemed to be a signal, a message written in fire and thrust. The meaning was unmistakable: accelerate or lose us. Marcus's hand moved to the throttle levers before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The F-22 had just told him something critical through the only language available: aeronautical action. Whatever lay ahead, whatever that pulsing glow represented, it required him to move faster than a cargo plane should ever move. He advanced the throttles smoothly, not the abrupt jam that amateurs used, but a controlled, deliberate increase in power. The Boeing 737 was never designed for combat maneuvers. Its airframe was built for efficiency, for reliability, for carrying cargo at moderate speeds across long distances. But it was still a jet, and even a freighter had power reserves. The engines spooled up, their whine increasing in pitch and intensity. The fuselage began to vibrate, not dangerously but noticeably. Marcus felt the subtle shudder through the control yoke, through the seat beneath him, through every bolt and rivet of the aircraft. He watched his airspeed indicator climb from 420 knots to 450, 460, 470. The aircraft was groaning now, not in mechanical distress, but in protest at being pushed beyond its comfort zone. The F-22s reformed on either side of him, their pilots maintaining perfect positioning despite his acceleration. Whatever these pilots were, they were among the best trained, most skilled aviators on the planet. They didn't slip. They didn't over-control. They moved with Marcus like they were part of his aircraft. "Nellie's departure, Stratosphere 447, is accelerating," Marcus reported, his breathing now coming in controlled, measured patterns. "Current speed 470 knots, maintaining altitude following fighter guidance. Request status on this operation." The pause that followed was even longer than before. Marcus watched the pulsing glow ahead grow larger, more distinct. It wasn't quite visible detail yet, but it was losing its abstract quality. It was becoming something real, something substantial. When the controller's voice came back, it carried a different quality entirely. Not uncertain, but resigned. Like someone who had decided to cross a line they couldn't uncross. "Stratosphere 447, maintain your current course. We are tracking your operation at the highest levels. You are ordered to continue following fighter guidance. Do not transmit again unless there is an emergency." Ordered, not requested, not suggested, ordered. Marcus acknowledged with a simple "Roger" and fell silent. The radio crackled with its empty, expectant sound. He was alone now with the two F-22s and the mystery ahead. Completely alone with a decision that had been made at levels far above his clearance. He had crossed from routine into something else entirely, and there was no going back. The cargo plane's speed climbed higher, 480 knots, 490. The aircraft was vibrating more noticeably now, and Marcus could hear new sounds emerging from the fuselage, the creaks and groans of structure being stressed beyond design parameters. But the airframe was holding. The engines were steady. Everything was holding. And then he saw it. At first, it was just the edge of it, a distortion in the air itself, like heat shimmer but impossibly organized, impossibly geometric. It didn't shimmer randomly across the landscape. Instead, it moved with purpose, with direction. The pulsing rhythm Marcus had detected from a distance was now clearly visible as something that resembled breathing, something that resembled awareness. His mind struggled to categorize what he was seeing. Not weather, not a reflection, not any natural phenomenon he had ever encountered in 30 years of flying. The distortion was roughly circular, perhaps 40 to 50 feet in diameter, though the darkness and distance made precise measurement impossible. It hung in the air maybe 8,000 feet below his current altitude, and it moved with the kind of smooth, controlled motion that suggested deliberate action. The lead F-22 banked sharply downward, its wing cutting through the darkness. The message was clear: descend, follow it down, get a closer look. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he began a controlled descent. The cargo plane's nose dropped, angle of attack decreasing. The distortion below grew larger, clearer, more terrible in its strangeness. His instruments showed nothing unusual. No radar contacts, No electromagnetic interference, no technical anomalies. But his eyes, his instincts, his 30 years of accumulated flying experience, all screamed that he was descending towards something that shouldn't exist. The F-22s maintained perfect formation on either side, shepherding the freighter down toward the impossible thing below. Marcus could feel his heartbeat now, steady and strong despite the fear. This was the moment. This was the instant when he discovered what lay beyond the comfortable invisibility of routine cargo runs. This was when the night revealed who he truly was. His voice, when he spoke to himself in the darkness of the cockpit, was barely a whisper. "What the hell is that?" The descent rate was steady at 800 feet per minute. Marcus maintained precise control of the aircraft, his training overriding the primal fear that wanted to scream in his chest. The cargo plane descended through 20,000 feet, then 18,000, the F-22s maintaining their perfect formation positions on either side. Below, the distortion continued its slow, rhythmic pulsing, if it could be called pulsing. It was more like breathing. The thing expanded and contracted with an almost biological quality that made Marcus's skin crawl. His altitude read 16,500 feet now. The distortion was less than 8,000 feet below him, growing steadily larger in his field of vision. What had seemed abstract from a distance was becoming terrifyingly concrete. There was structure to it, not rigid structure but organization. Layers of something that looked like energy made visible, rippling outward from a central point. The color was indescribable, not quite silver, not quite white, not quite the blue-gray of ionized air. Something in between, something that shouldn't exist. Marcus's mouth was bone-dry. His hands, despite the controlled descent, were beginning to ache from the tension of maintaining perfect pressure on the yoke. Every muscle in his body was coiled, waiting for the moment when this would transition from the impossible to the catastrophic. "Altitude 14,000, he murmured to himself, cross-checking his instruments. Everything remained nominal. Airspeed 410 knots, descent rate steady, heading locked. His navigation system showed his exact position. His fuel status was good. Every instrument told him that everything was normal, that he was a pilot flying a routine sortie in a military corridor, nothing unusual occurring. But his eyes saw something that didn't exist on any chart, something that had no designation, no classification, no name in any manual he'd ever studied. The lead F-22 pulled back slightly on the stick, reducing descent rate. Marcus mirrored the movement, keeping the cargo plane in perfect alignment. They leveled off at 12,000 feet, now only 4,000 feet above the distortion, close enough that Marcus could see details. There was a center point, a concentration of energy so intense it almost hurt to look at, and from that center, waves of distortion rippled outward in perfect concentric patterns, like dropping a stone in still water, except the water was reality itself. Then something changed. The distortion contracted suddenly, sharply, pulling inward like an intake of breath. The ripples accelerated, their frequency increasing. The color shifted, deepening from that indescribable silver to something that held undertones of violet, of ultraviolet, of colors that human eyes weren't designed to perceive. Marcus felt a pressure change in the cockpit. His instruments would later show a 2 millibar drop, completely impossible given their altitude. His hand moved instinctively to the oxygen mask, but he didn't don it. Not yet. Whatever was happening, panicking wouldn't help. The second F-22 banked sharply to the left, and Marcus saw the fighter's pilot lean forward in the cockpit, saw him make a gesture, pointing downward with unmistakable urgency. The message was clear: look, watch, witness what we're showing you. Marcus's eyes locked on the distortion as it began to move. Not drift randomly, but move with clear intentionality. It rose slightly, maybe 500 feet, then stopped. Then rose again. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost cautious, like something testing whether it was being observed. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered. His mind cycled through explanations frantically. Some kind of military experimental aircraft. Impossible, nothing in the U.S. arsenal moved like that. A foreign weapon system. No nation had technology of this sophistication. Weather phenomenon, plasma column, electromagnetic anomaly. None of the explanations fit. None of them even came close. But here it was. Absolutely real, absolutely present, existing in the air less than 2 miles from his aircraft. The distortion expanded again, rapidly this time, ballooning outward to perhaps 60 feet in diameter. The intensity of the central point increased, and Marcus's instruments began to register anomalies. His radio crackled with interference. His navigation display flickered once, then locked back in. His compass, the simple magnetic backup that had guided pilots for a century, began to spin slowly. One of the F-22s, Marcus couldn't tell which, transmitted a single brief burst of radio static. Not words, just a carrier wave that lasted less than a second. A warning. A signal to other aircraft in the area, or perhaps to ground control, that something was occurring. Marcus pushed the yoke slightly forward, descending another 1,000 feet until he was at 11,000 feet, barely 1,500 feet above the phenomenon. The distortion pulsed again, and this time Marcus felt it. Not heard it, not saw it, felt it. A pressure wave that shook his entire aircraft like a hand closing around the fuselage. The cargo shifted in the hold behind him. Warning lights flickered across his panel. The airframe groaned, and for a moment Marcus thought the wings might separate from the fuselage. But they didn't. The aircraft held together, and Marcus maintained control. The distortion contracted again, more violently this time. The ripples from its center moved outward at increasing velocity, and when they reached the F-22s, both fighters shuddered. Not violently, but perceptibly. Marcus saw the lead pilot's hands grip the stick, saw both pilots' heads snap around as they assessed the impact. Something was happening. Something was changing. The phenomenon was becoming more active, more energetic. Whether in response to their presence or due to its own internal cycle, Marcus couldn't determine. But the energy level was increasing exponentially. The lead F-22 suddenly banked hard to the right, pulling away from the distortion. The second fighter did the same, both aircraft accelerating hard, moving away from the phenomenon with purposeful urgency. The message was unmistakable now, no longer subtle. Get away. Now. Immediately. Marcus didn't hesitate. He yanked the yoke backward, climbing hard, and advanced his throttles all the way to full. The cargo plane's engines screamed in protest as he pushed them past limits they weren't designed for. The airframe shook violently. Alarms sounded in the cockpit, but Marcus climbed, pulled the aircraft up and away from the distortion as fast as the underpowered freighter could manage. Behind him, below him, the distortion pulsed one final time, a massive expansion of energy that lit up the entire desert floor below in a flash of otherworldly light. Marcus saw the ground briefly, saw the landscape illuminated in that impossible color, saw the shadows cast by his own aircraft against the desert rocks below. Then the light faded. The distortion began to collapse inward, its ripples accelerating to the center, pulling the entire phenomenon into a tight sphere of concentrated energy. It shrank rapidly, becoming smaller and smaller until with one final pulse, it simply vanished. Disappeared. No explosion, no dispersal, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. Marcus, climbing hard, still pushing the cargo plane to its limits, let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like an eternity. The F-22s reformed on either side of him, their pilots holding formation once again. And ahead, illuminating the darkness, Marcus could see the lights of an airfield. Nellie's, their destination. They were being brought home. The runway lights appeared ahead like a pathway to safety, but Marcus knew, on some fundamental level, that safety was no longer relevant to his situation. The Nellie's air traffic control tower had cleared him for immediate landing with no preamble, no delay, no friendly chatter. Just Stratosphere 447, cleared for immediate landing, runway 3 left. Emergency vehicles standing by. Emergency vehicles standing by. His hands moved through the landing checklist with muscle memory that required no conscious thought. Gear down, 3 greens, flaps to landing configuration, speed brakes extended. The cargo plane descended smoothly, the F-22s peeling away in formation as Marcus committed to the approach. They'd done their job. Now the machinery of institutional response was taking over. He could see them now through the windscreen. The vehicles lined up along the taxiway like something from a war movie. Fire trucks, ambulances, military police vehicles, and figures in dark uniforms standing ready. Dozens of them. The kind of response reserved for aircraft emergencies, for situations where immediate medical intervention might be required. Marcus was fine, physically intact, but the people waiting for him didn't know that. All they knew was that a civilian cargo pilot had been escorted by military fighters to an emergency landing at a classified military facility, and they had no idea what they would find. The main landing gear touched down first, a gentle kiss of rubber on asphalt. The nose gear followed. Marcus was already bleeding off speed, using full flaps and speed brakes to slow the aircraft as much as possible while maintaining control. His training, decades of it, had become pure reflex. Land the airplane. That was the only imperative that mattered now. The cargo plane rolled to a stop in the designated area, and before he could even reach for the parking brake, figures began moving. Not chaos, but choreographed response. Military personnel in tactical gear surrounded the aircraft. Not threatening, but unmistakably serious. This was a security operation. Marcus cut the engines. The airframe creaked as it cooled, the metal contracting after being pushed far beyond its design parameters. He sat in the sudden silence for a moment, his hands trembling now that the immediate demands of flying were over. The adrenaline crash was beginning, a wave of exhaustion and disorientation washing across his consciousness. Then the cabin door was being pounded on, hard, urgent. "Open the door, pilot, respond." A male voice, young, military, brooking no argument. Marcus unstrapped himself and moved toward the cabin door, his legs unsteady beneath him. He opened it manually, and immediately figures in full tactical gear appeared in the opening, rifles held at low ready, face shields down, complete operational readiness. "Hands visible," the lead soldier commanded. "Step down, hands above your head." Marcus complied without hesitation. He had no intention of complicating this situation further. He placed his hands on the sides of the doorway and carefully lowered himself to the ground. The asphalt was still warm from the day's heat, though it was now well past midnight. The desert night surrounded them, vast and empty except for the concentrated bubble of military activity. Hand seized his arms, not gently, not roughly, but with professional certainty. He was guided away from the aircraft, away from the taxiway, toward a waiting vehicle, a Humvee with tinted windows. The door opened, and he was placed carefully but firmly into the back seat. 2 soldiers sat with him, one on each side. Neither spoke. Marcus wanted to say something, to explain, to protest that he wasn't under arrest, but he understood that this was no longer about conversation. This was about securing a witness to an event that almost certainly existed at the highest classification levels of the U.S. military. The Humvee pulled away from the immediate response area, moving deeper into Nellie's, away from the flight line and toward the administrative section of the base. Marcus watched through the window as the landscape passed. Hangars, maintenance facilities, barracks buildings, all dark at this hour. The base that he'd flown into hundreds of times suddenly felt alien, transformed into something security-conscious and dangerous. They pulled up to a nondescript concrete building. No signs, no identifying markings. The kind of structure that housed classified operations, the kind of place where visitors disappeared for interrogations that might last hours or days. Marcus was escorted inside. The corridor was institutional beige, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed with a frequency that made his teeth ache. Doors lined both sides, all closed. They walked past conference rooms, past offices, past what looked like a break room with vending machines that seemed obscenely normal given the circumstances. They stopped at a door marked only with a number, 3. One of the soldiers knocked twice. The door opened immediately, as if someone had been waiting on the other side. "Mr. Webb," a woman's voice said, "please come in." The soldiers stepped back, and Marcus found himself facing a woman in an Air Force flight suit, her rank insignia identifying her as a lieutenant colonel. She had dark hair pulled back severely, intelligent eyes that assessed him with the clinical precision of someone trained in reading people. Her nameplate read, Hendricks. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hendricks, Air Force Special Investigations," she said, gesturing to a chair across a metal table. "Please sit down." The room was sparse. The table, 2 chairs, a recording device mounted in the corner, nothing else. No windows, the kind of room designed for difficult conversations. Marcus sat. His entire body felt hollowed out, like someone had removed essential components and replaced them with exhaustion. Patricia Hendricks sat across from him and opened a folder. It contained nothing, Marcus could see, just an empty manila folder, a classic interview technique designed to make subjects think they were already under suspicion. "You've had quite a night," Patricia said, her voice calm and professional. "How are you feeling?" Marcus started, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I don't understand what just happened. I was flying a routine cargo mission. I was intercepted. I followed the fighters. And then," he trailed off, unable to find words for what had occurred. "And then," Patricia prompted, leaning forward slightly. "There was something in the sky," Marcus said. "Some kind of phenomenon, energy maybe, a distortion. I don't know how to describe it. It was there. It was real. And then it vanished." Patricia was writing something in a small notebook. Not the folder, a personal notebook, which suggested she was taking his words seriously. "Mr. Webb, I need you to understand something," she said, looking directly at him. "What you witnessed tonight is classified at the highest levels. You are currently in a secure facility under the authority of the Department of Defense. What you experienced, what you saw, where you were, and the fact that you were even there, all of it is classified. Is that clear?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm going to ask you to go through everything," Patricia continued. "Starting from the moment you received clearance to take off from Nellie's. I want every detail, every observation, every feeling, every instrument reading you remember. This is going to take several hours. Are you physically able to continue, or do you require medical attention?" "I'm fine," Marcus said. "I can do this." Patricia smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile, but it carried something like respect. "Good. Because before we're done, Mr. Webb, you're going to help us understand something that you may be the only civilian pilot alive who's experienced firsthand." She opened her notebook to the first page, pen poised. "Let's start at the beginning," she said. "Tell me about your pre-flight briefing at Nellie's. 7 hours." Marcus had been in the room with Patricia Hendricks for 7 hours. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant, hypnotic frequency. The recording device in the corner blinked red, capturing every word. Patricia had ordered coffee at hour 3, black, no sugar, and water at hour 5. Marcus had consumed both mechanically, his throat dry despite the liquid. His voice had grown hoarse from talking. They'd gone over the timeline 17 times now. Not because he kept contradicting himself, but because Patricia wanted to understand his decision-making process at each critical juncture. Why had he increased speed when the second F-22's afterburners ignited? What exactly had he felt when the pressure wave hit his aircraft? How many feet below him did the distortion seem? Could he estimate its angular size relative to the windscreen? "Let's return to the moment of descent," Patricia said, her voice still patient, still measured despite the hour. She had the ability to make each question sound like the first she'd asked, though Marcus recognized the repetition as interrogation technique. "Walk me through your instruments." Marcus had lost count of how many times he'd walked through this moment. But he did it again, drawing from the deep wells of recall that his 30 years of flying had trained him to maintain. Navigation was perfect, he said, his voice rough. Heading locked, altitude steady during the descent, airspeed controlled. But around 12,000 feet I began to notice instrument anomalies. My radio developed static. My magnetic compass started to drift, then spin. The navigation display flickered. All of which would be consistent with, Patricia prompted. Electromagnetic interference, Marcus said. Severe electromagnetic interference. Nothing natural causes that kind of disruption. Patricia made a note. Not in her small notebook anymore, but in a larger file that had grown progressively thicker throughout the interrogation. Inside that folder were sketches Marcus had drawn, timeline diagrams, instrument readings he'd reconstructed from memory, and pages of questions and answers. And the visual phenomenon itself, Patricia continued, flipping through her notes. You described it as a distortion. Could you be more specific? Marcus had described it dozens of times, but he tried again, searching for words that could capture the indescribable. It was like, imagine looking at heat shimmer off asphalt but organized, geometric, with layers. The center point was the most intense. It was so bright I couldn't look directly at it for more than a few seconds. The color shifted. I called it silver, then violet. But it was beyond normal color perception. Like my eyes were trying to interpret something that exists partially outside the visible spectrum. Partially outside the visible spectrum, Patricia repeated, writing. That's an interesting phrase. Why did you use partially? Because parts of it were clearly visible, Marcus said. But parts of it seemed to exist in spaces my brain couldn't quite process, like optical illusions but worse, more fundamental. Patricia leaned back, studying him with those intelligent, assessing eyes. Mr. Webb, I'm going to tell you something now. I'm authorized to do so because you've demonstrated consistent, reliable recall. Your observations are detailed. Your descriptions are consistent. And your decision-making throughout the incident was exemplary. She paused, letting the statement settle. What you witnessed was not a natural phenomenon. It was not weather. It was not a reflection or an optical illusion. It was something real, something that exists, something that we, the military, the government, the intelligence community, we've been tracking for 3 years. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly, not because of the revelation itself, but because of what it implied. They'd known this thing was out there, and they'd sent a cargo pilot to witness it. Why, Marcus asked, his voice cracking slightly. Why me? Why was I sent to see it? Patricia closed her folder slowly. Her expression remained neutral, but something shifted behind her eyes. Because we needed observation from someone outside the usual military hierarchy. Someone with experience enough to maintain composure and make sound decisions. Someone whose observations wouldn't be filtered through military protocol or the assumptions that come with classified clearances. You used me, Marcus said, the realization hardening into certainty. We positioned you, Patricia corrected gently. Your cargo run was routine. Your route was filed normally, but your flight plan was adjusted 6 minutes before your departure. A minor deviation, nothing noticeable to standard operations, and the F-22s were already in position, waiting for you to arrive at that specific location. The cargo, Marcus said suddenly, the medical equipment, it was never really. Your cargo was real, Patricia interrupted. Bound for Kirtland as scheduled. We didn't compromise your professional integrity. We simply ensured that you would be in the right place at the right time. And if I hadn't followed the F-22s, Marcus asked, if I'd continued on my flight plan? Patricia didn't answer immediately. She picked up her coffee cup, took a sip from what must have been a cold residue, and set it back down. "Then someone else would have been positioned," she said finally. "We've been waiting for the right moment, the right location, the right observer. We needed someone who would see it, document it, and remain calm enough to survive the encounter." The word "survive" hung in the air between them like a threat. "People have died," Marcus asked quietly. "People have disappeared," Patricia said. "We have documentation of 3 civilian aircraft in various countries that experienced encounters with the phenomenon. All 3 disappeared from radar. All 3 were lost. We don't know if they were destroyed by the phenomenon or if they simply ceased to exist." Marcus felt cold despite the warm room. He thought about his son, about Julie and her new husband Robert, about his ex-wife's relief when she'd learned Marcus had survived whatever had happened tonight. She would have received a call by now, he realized. They would have called her. Military personnel, probably, explaining that there had been an incident but that he was safe. "How did you know I would survive?" Marcus asked. "We didn't," Patricia said simply. "That's why we positioned someone with your experience level, 23,000 hours, military background, a pilot who thinks clearly under pressure and who has demonstrated the ability to make sound decisions when standard procedures are inadequate." "You monitored my entire career," Marcus realized, "before tonight." "We monitor the careers of several thousand civilian pilots," Patricia said. "Most of them will never be aware of it. Most will live their entire professional lives without being positioned for something like this. You were selected because your profile matched the requirements we established." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward. He walked to the corner of the room, away from Patricia, trying to process what he'd just learned. His entire career, his decades of invisible flying, had been monitored and cataloged by military intelligence. His decisions, his precision, his calm demeanor, all of it had been noted and evaluated and filed away until the moment they needed to use him. "What happens now?" he asked, not turning around. "Now," Patricia said, "you rest. You've given us everything we need from you for the moment. We'll provide you with accommodations here on base, military quarters. You're not confined, but you're not permitted to leave Nellie's either. We have more questions tomorrow." "And if I refuse?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you remain on this base under military authority pending a national security briefing and classification determination," Patricia said, "which would be significantly less comfortable than voluntary cooperation. I'd recommend the latter, Mr. Webb." Marcus turned to face her. In the harsh fluorescent light, she looked exhausted, and he realized that she'd been awake as long as he had. She hadn't left the room once in 7 hours. "You knew," he said. "You knew what would happen. You knew I'd see it." "We suspected," Patricia corrected. "We hoped. And you did more than see it, Mr. Webb. You documented it through an objective observer's eyes. You survived it. And you maintained enough professional composure to describe it coherently. That makes you valuable to us in ways you don't yet understand." She stood, closing her folder. "A soldier will escort you to your quarters. You have access to a phone if you need to contact anyone. But remember, everything you've experienced tonight remains classified. Is that clear?" Marcus nodded slowly. As he followed the young soldier out of the interrogation room and into the hallway beyond, one question consumed his thoughts. What was that thing? And why had the military been waiting for it? The military quarters were sparse but clean. A single bed with military-issue sheets, a desk, a chair, a small bathroom with military soap that smelled like institutional efficiency. Marcus had slept for 12 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep that his body had demanded after 48 hours of interrogation and adrenaline. When he woke, a soldier was waiting outside his door with breakfast. He wasn't a prisoner, Patricia had said, but the armed guard suggested something different. For 3 days, Marcus lived in this limbo. He attended a second interrogation session with Patricia, though it was shorter, Just 2 hours, focusing on details he'd already provided. He was shown classified photographs, satellite imagery, radar signatures, electromagnetic readings, all apparently designed to confirm that what he'd seen matched what the military already knew about the phenomenon. On the fourth day, a different soldier arrived. Young, female, with the bearing and precision of someone trained in combat operations. "Captain Chen will see you now," she said. "Follow me." Marcus followed the soldier through corridors he'd only glimpsed before. They moved deeper into the classified section of Nellie's, past security checkpoints where his escort's credentials were scanned and verified. Finally, they arrived at a flight operations briefing room. Through the window, Marcus could see the desert, the tarmac, the runways where the F-22s operated. Inside the briefing room, a woman in a flight suit stood waiting. She had dark hair cut short, the kind of careful efficiency that military aviators preferred. Her name tape read, Chen, Captain Sarah Chen, and her eyes, when she smiled, held something Marcus hadn't seen in days, genuine warmth. "Mr. Webb," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen. I was the lead F-22 on your intercept. I wanted to meet you formally and to tell you something." Marcus shook her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "What's that, Captain?" "The pilots are calling you Night Fury," she said. "It's a call sign, not your name, a designation of respect. You've earned it." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A call sign. In military aviation, call signs were reserved for pilots, not for civilians, not for someone outside the system. But the moment Sarah said it, he understood he'd crossed a line. He was no longer entirely civilian. He was something else now. "Why Night Fury?" Marcus asked. Sarah gestured for him to sit. She remained standing, her posture alert despite the casual setting. "Several reasons. First, you fly exclusively at night. Second, your responses were precise and decisive under circumstances that would have caused panic in 99% of pilots. Third, and this is the most important part, you maintained absolute composure while witnessing something that our instruments showed was generating electromagnetic signatures off the scale. You didn't panic. You flew. You observed. You survived." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "And fourth, because fury is the right word for what you displayed out there. Not anger, not aggression. Fury in the sense of focused, controlled intensity. You flew that cargo plane like it was a fighter. You made decisions a fighter pilot would make. That's rare, Mr. Webb. That's worthy of recognition." Marcus felt his throat tighten, invisible for 16 years, and now being given a call sign by fighter pilots. The irony wasn't lost on him. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Sarah's expression became guarded. "That depends on several things. First, you need to understand something. What you witnessed that night, the phenomenon, its behavior, its apparent responsiveness to your presence, it matters. It matters to the Air Force. It matters to classified programs that exist at levels above even my clearance." She sat down across from him. 3 years ago, we started detecting anomalies in the Nevada Test Range airspace. Electromagnetic signatures that couldn't be explained. Object sightings that our pilots couldn't categorize. Initially, we thought it was experimental aircraft from other nations. Chinese, Russian, maybe even private aerospace corporations. But the behavior didn't match any known platform. "What kind of behavior?" Marcus asked. "Defiance of physics," Sarah said bluntly. "Acceleration that shouldn't be possible. Direction changes that would kill a human pilot. Electromagnetic effects that our best engineers can't explain. It was like something was testing our airspace, testing our response, testing what we would do." She leaned forward. "And then, that night, it responded to you, to your presence specifically. The phenomenon exhibited behavior we'd never documented before. It moved with apparent awareness. It expanded and contracted as if it was communicating. And then it vanished in a way that suggests technology we can't comprehend." "Why tell me this?" Marcus asked. I'm not military, I have no clearance. Because you need to understand the weight of what you're carrying now, Sarah said. You witnessed something that very few people on this planet have ever seen. You survived something that has killed others, and you observed it with precision that our classified systems couldn't match. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the desert. The decision hasn't been made yet about what to do with you. Some people think you should be kept on base indefinitely, for your own security, ostensibly. Some think you should be integrated into our research programs. Some think you should be released with a permanent security detail and comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. And what do you think? Marcus asked. Sarah turned to face him. Her eyes held something like respect, maybe even kinship. I think you should fly, she said. I think you should continue doing what you do best, moving through the night with precision and control. But I think you should know that you're not invisible anymore. The military knows your name. Your call sign exists in classified briefings. Whether you remain in public as an ordinary cargo pilot or whether you're eventually brought into classified programs, you've crossed into a world where you matter. Marcus felt something breaking open inside him. The invisibility that had defined his professional life, the anonymity that had been his comfort, was gone. And in its place was recognition. Not public, not celebrated, but real. The kind of recognition that came from people who understood exactly what he'd accomplished. Is there anything I can do, Marcus asked, to help with whatever this is? Sarah smiled. There might be, but that's above my pay grade. Patricia Hendricks will have another conversation with you before you're released from base. In the meantime, I wanted you to know that what you did out there, it mattered. You flew like a night fury, Mr. Webb. And in military aviation, that's the highest compliment one pilot can give another. She extended her hand again, and this time when Marcus took it, he felt the weight of what had happened. He was no longer the invisible cargo pilot. He was Night Fury, a call sign, a reputation, a man who'd crossed the threshold from routine into the extraordinary. As Sarah walked him back to the corridor, Marcus asked one final question. Captain, do you think it's coming back? The phenomenon? Sarah paused at the door. In the harsh hallway light, her expression was unreadable. Yes, she said simply. I think it will. And when it does, I think someone will need to be there to meet it again. Someone experienced, someone calm, someone like you. Then she was gone, and Marcus was left standing in the corridor, understanding with absolute certainty that his life had changed forever. The night had revealed who he truly was, and now the entire military establishment knew it too. 5 years later, Marcus Webb was still invisible. To the outside world, he was exactly what he'd always been, an anonymous cargo pilot for Stratosphere Logistics, ferrying supplies and equipment across America's darkest routes. His uniform was the same. His aircraft were similar models. His call sign with air traffic control remained simply his pilot certification number. The world hadn't changed its relationship with him because the world had never known to notice him in the first place. But in the community that mattered, in the briefing rooms of classified operations, in the classified databases of Air Force Special Investigations, in the whispered conversations of elite military aviators, Marcus Webb was someone entirely different. He was Night Fury, a legend, a benchmark, a name spoken in contexts that existed 3 levels above public consciousness. Patricia Hendricks had kept her word. After 3 weeks on base, Marcus had been released with a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, a permanent security clearance, and instructions to continue his civilian flying career while remaining available for consultations if necessary. Those consultations had occurred 3 times in 5 years, short meetings where he'd provided perspective on phenomena that bore some resemblance to what he'd witnessed that night. He'd asked no questions about what they were investigating. They'd offered no explanations. The call sign had spread faster than anyone had anticipated. Captain Chen had mentioned it casually to other F-22 pilots. They'd mentioned it to their colleagues. The name had begun appearing in classified briefings, in operational logs, in the footnotes of research papers written by military engineers trying to understand what they'd encountered. By the time Marcus realized how widely it had spread, it had taken on a life of its own. Young pilots whispered about Night Fury, not as a person but as a concept, a story, a reminder that there were civilians out there, ordinary people who did their jobs with such precision and calm that they'd witnessed the impossible and lived to tell about it. The name became shorthand for competence under extreme pressure, for clarity when everything was chaotic, for the kind of professionalism that transcended military rank or civilian status. Marcus had attended one classified aviation symposium where he'd been identified only as a civilian consultant. The room, filled with Air Force engineers, intelligence analysts, and senior pilots, had gone quiet when he'd entered. He'd overheard someone whisper, "That's him. That's Night Fury." The realization that his legend had spread beyond mere whispers into the realm of actual recognition had been strange and disorienting. But his flying remained unchanged. He still departed Nellies at night. He still flew cargo routes with meticulous precision. He still filed flight plans and maintained his equipment to exacting standards. The difference was that now, occasionally, he would notice F-22s on his scope, not intercepting him but maintaining awareness, watching. And sometimes, in the communication between pilots and ground control, he would hear his call sign used as a reference point. "That's Night Fury's route," or "Maintain Night Fury protocols," or "Awareness level should match Night Fury standards." His son, David, had graduated high school 2 years ago. He was at Arizona State studying aerospace engineering. When they talked on the phone, David asked carefully structured questions about Marcus's work. Marcus answered carefully, respecting the security agreements even with his own son. David seemed to understand that something significant had occurred during those 5 years, even if Marcus couldn't explain what. There was a new respect in how David addressed his father, a recognition that Marcus was more than just the distant, invisible pilot who remembered to call on birthdays. Julie, Marcus's ex-wife, had noticed the change more directly. At David's high school graduation, she'd pulled Marcus aside. "Something happened," she'd said. "It wasn't a question." "I can't talk about it," Marcus had replied. "I know," Julie had said, "but David's proud of you. Even if he doesn't know why, that's a good thing." Marcus's love life remained non-existent. He'd attempted to date twice since the incident, but both relationships had ended quickly. The secrecy was part of it. The periodic disappearances for consultations with the military was part of it. But mostly, it was that Marcus had changed in ways that were difficult to articulate to someone outside the experience. He couldn't explain to a civilian woman what it meant to have witnessed something that defied categorization. Couldn't describe the weight of carrying classified knowledge. Couldn't make someone understand why he sometimes stood on his back porch at night and stared at the sky, waiting. Because that was the truth that Sarah Chen had spoken 5 years ago. It would return. Marcus felt it with the same certainty that had first warned him something was wrong during his initial flight. The phenomenon hadn't disappeared. It had simply withdrawn, and it would come back. When it did, the military would probably call him. The thought didn't frighten Marcus anymore. It had taken 3 years to stop fearing it, but he'd eventually accepted the probability as part of his existence now. He was no longer entirely civilian. He was no longer entirely military. He existed in the space between, marked by an experience that had transformed him into something both ordinary and extraordinary. His current cargo run, departing Nellies at 2:47 a.m., the same time as that first fateful flight, carried medical supplies bound for Kirtland. Routine, unremarkable, exactly the kind of flight that would never appear in any news report or aviation magazine. He was climbing through 8,000 feet when he noticed the pressure in the air change. Marcus's hands remained steady on the yoke. His breathing remained controlled. He was still invisible to the world, still unremarked upon, still just another cargo pilot in the darkness. But his name was Night Fury, and he would be ready. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and eternal. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, things moved that existed beyond human comprehension. And Marcus Webb, invisible for 16 years before being recognized, forgotten by the public even as he became legendary in classified circles, flew forward into that darkness with the absolute precision that had defined his entire career. He thought about Captain Chen's final words. When it comes back, someone will need to be there to meet it again. Someone experienced, someone calm, someone like you. Marcus had become that someone. Through no choice of his own, through the simple accident of being in the right place at the right time, he'd been marked for something beyond routine. And he'd accepted it. Not with enthusiasm, but with the same professional acknowledgement that had guided every decision of his flying career. The cargo in his hold was secure. The aircraft was performing nominally. His heading was true. And in his heart, Marcus Webb understood a truth that invisible people rarely get to discover. That competence, when recognized by those who matter, becomes immortality. Not the kind written in history books or celebrated in public, but the kind that exists in whispered conversations and classified databases. The kind that transforms an ordinary person into a legend. As his cargo plane hummed through the Nevada night, Marcus allowed himself a slight smile. He was Night Fury, and the night was his domain.